Looks like a royal visit in Barbados, but this is the state opening of Parliament. The Queen's representative about to deliver a historic message that will mean this pomp and ceremony will no longer take the same form on this island. The country's Governor-General, Dame Sandra Mason, with a speech written by the Prime Minister, Mia Mottley, in a similar format to what we would see here, the Queen reading out Boris Johnson's words.
The time has come to fully leave our colonial past behind. Barbadians want a Barbadian head of state. This is the ultimate statement of confidence in who we are and what we are capable of achieving.
The Queen first made her visit to the island as head of state in 1966. Later on in that year, Barbados would go on to achieve independence.
I love her.
The monarchy have made several visits. Here the Queen is again in 1989. The most recent visit by Prince Harry when he was representing the Queen on the 50th anniversary of Barbados' independence.
You are a remarkable nation, and I have no doubt that you have a remarkable future ahead.
Little did he know that just 4 years later, that would no longer include the Queen. But talk of her removal as head of state has been going on for a while. This time, Barbados' Prime Minister has put the decision front and centre of her new policy agenda, recently pressured by Barbadians challenging the status quo in the era of Black Lives Matter.
We need to break the ties not long time ago. So if they decide to do it next year before independence, I pray that I'll be around to see it.
This isn't the first Caribbean country to take this step. Guyana removed the Queen as their head of state in 1970. This happened less than 4 years after independence. Then in 1976, Trinidad and Tobago did the same, followed by Dominica 2 years later. Jamaica hasn't done so yet, but their Prime Minister has talked about whether they'd be next. Barbados is expected to stay in the Commonwealth, a voluntary association of former British territories. The country's colonial history first began in 1625, becoming a centre for the brutal transatlantic slave trade. Freedom from slavery happening over 200 years later. Modern-day Barbados wants a different future. As a republic, no longer having a head of state over 4,000 miles away. The question for other Caribbean nations is, will they follow?
Ayshah Tull with the background there, and I'm joined now by Professor Richard Drayton, a Rhodes Professor of Imperial History at King's College London. He was born in Guyana and grew up in Barbados. And also by Kehinde Andrews, Professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University. Gentlemen, both welcome to the programme. Kehinde Andrews, can I start with you? How did you react to this announcement?
I mean, largely with indifference. I mean, it's frankly astounding that 54 years after so-called independence, Barbados still has the Queen as the head of state. And it is a reminder that the Queen remains the head of state for 14 nations. I mean, we're about to celebrate the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham, but it is a deeply problematic reminder of just how little has changed since the colonial era.
Richard Drayton, is this just a symbolic move, do you think?
Well, I think symbols are important. Like the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, I am part of the independence generation, which was born in the era of independence in the Caribbean. And for people like us and people younger than us, it's a little bit absurd that your head of state depends on whoever is born into a family several thousand miles away. What difference will it make? I think that from the perspective of those who support a republic in Barbados, this will be part of a more wholesale interrogation of the colonial legacies in the society, which extend in all manner of directions. If one looks in particular at the constitutional arrangements, the Independence Constitution of Barbados in 1966 contained within it particular laws called savings laws, which protected from judicial intervention a variety of colonial era statutes, penalizing people for being poor, vagrancy laws, criminalizing same-sex relationships, putting in place the death penalty. And what this moment of becoming a republic inaugurates is an interrogation of who we are as a nation and what sort of polity we would wish to live in.
Professor Andrews, that sounds like some substantial changes beginning, no?
No, I mean, I think this is just reminiscent of when we celebrate so-called independence. The problem has always largely been that the countries like Barbados remain in a deeply problematic economic relationship to the West. So, for example, Barbados is celebrated, but its economy is based on tourism, offshore banking, and remittances for people who've migrated out. It still heavily depends on the West. There's still lots of problems with poverty in the whole region. I mean, the CARICOM countries, of which Barbados is one, are still trying to get reparations for slavery. So this doesn't change any of that. And there are many countries that don't have the Queen as a head of state, but are still in the same relationship they ever were to Britain, and that's the big problem.
Isn't it the beginning, though?
Kehinde is right, but what I would say is that we should not think of historical change as the flipping of a light switch, where you go immediately from darkness to light. The nature of history is that processes take a very long time, and that we should not imagine that the kind of transformation of the world of domination, which was created over several centuries of colonialism, was going to be revised by a flag being changed at midnight in 1966. And I think that he's absolutely correct, that in many ways there are persistent forms of cultural and economic and colonialism. And indeed, there are new forms of economic colonialism which have descended upon us. But I think it's very important to recognize that there is something significant in people's attempt to create forms of sovereignty which are based on their own community and on their society. The first Prime Minister of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, had an expression where he said, "Seek ye first the political kingdom." What he meant by that was not that independence would produce automatically a new Ghana, and indeed he was tragically correct in that prophecy, but that move towards independence would inaugurate the possibility of wide-range transformation.
Okay, so Kehinde Andrews, what sort of further action would you like to see? You mentioned reparations there. How do you see that process beginning?
I mean, I think that's the big question that the Caribbean needs to have a conversation about, right? Like, we have all these black people in the Caribbean, and this is about slavery. The poverty in the Caribbean is about slavery. And the question isn't whether the Queen is a head of state or whether you have a Barbadian head of state. The question is, have we had repair for those damages? And I'm sorry, this is one of those, we're in this moment of Black Lives Matter, and all the changes are symbolic. Whether the Queen is head of state really is immaterial. The question is, can you get reparations for the significant damage that continues to be done? This isn't something that's ended. This is still something that's very much with us. And until we're having that conversation, I mean, whoever leads the country really doesn't matter.
Professor Drayton, what do you think about what Kehinde has just said in terms of reparations and so on?
I think these are quite separate matters. And I think that they're very complicated issues surrounding reparations. The question really of, who would be the payer, who would be the recipient, how would this be managed? A lot of the arguments about reparations which have emerged over the last decade have amounted to a kind of translation of the arguments for development aid, which took place in the 1960s and 70s, where there'd be government-to-government transfers. No, I think these would be wonderful things and they're worth doing, but it doesn't quite solve the problem which Kehinde is looking at.
Very quickly, Kehinde Andrews, do you see other countries following suit? Could we see Jamaica next, perhaps?
I mean, I would like to. Like I said, this for me should have just happened. I mean, when we had supposed so-called independence, it's surprising this never happened. This is one of the reasons why the Commonwealth needs to be abolished. So I would hope that countries do take this step, but it's not really a step. It should already have been done